Hello, this is your host, Todd Lewis, the Praise of Folly podcast. This is episode 25 of Sutton and Wall Street and episode 7 of Wall Street and Hitler. Were American industrialists and financiers guilty of war crimes? The Nuremberg war crimes trials proposed to select those responsible for World War II preparations and atrocities and place them on trial. Whether such procedure is morally justifiable is a debatable matter. There is some justification for holding that Nuremberg was a political farce removed from legal principle. However, if we assume that there is such legal and moral justification, then surely any such trial should apply to all, irrespective of nationality. What, for example, should expect Franklin D. Roosevelt and Winston Churchill, but not exempt Adolf Hitler and Goring? If the offense is preparation for war, not blind vengeance, then justice should be impartial. The directives prepared by the U.S. Control Council in Germany for the arrests and detention of war criminals refer to Nazis and Nazi sympathizers, not Germans. The relevant extracts are as follows. A. You will search out, arrest, and hold pending receipt by your further instructions as to their disposition. Adolf Hitler, his chief Nazi associates, and other war criminals, and all persons who have participated in planning or carrying out Nazi enterprises involving or resulting in atrocities or war crimes. Then following a list of categories of persons to be arrested, including A, Nazis and Nazi sympathizers, holding important and key positions in A, national and civic and economic organizations, B, corporations and other organizations in which the government has a major financial interest, C, industry, commerce, agriculture, and finance, D, education, E, the judiciary, and F, the press, publishing houses, and other agencies disseminating news and propaganda. Top American industries and financiers named in this book are covered by the categories listed above. Henry Ford and Edsel Ford, respectively, contributed money to Hitler and profited from German wartime production. Standard Oil of New Jersey, General Electric, General Motors, and ITT certainly made financial or technical contributions, which comprised prima facie evidence of participating in planning or carrying out Nazi enterprises. There is, in brief, evidence which suggests A, cooperation with the Wehrmacht, Ford Motor Company, Chase Bank, Morgan Bank, B, aid to the Nazi four-year plan and economic mobilization for war, Standard Oil of New Jersey, B, C, creating and equipping the Nazi war machine, ITT, D, stockpiling critical materials for the Nazis, Eiffel Corporation, E, weakening the Nazis' potential enemies, American IG Farben, and F, carrying on of propaganda, intelligence, and espionage, American IG Farben and Rockefeller Public Relations man Ivy Lee. At the very least, there is sufficient evidence to demand a thorough and impartial investigation. However, as we have noted previously, these same firms and financiers were prominent in the 1933 election of Roosevelt and consequently had sufficient political pull to squelch threats of investigation. Extracts from the Morgenthau Diary demonstrate that Wall Street political power was sufficient even to control the appointment of officers responsible for the denazification and eventual government of post-war Germany. Did these American firms know of their assistance to Hitler's military regime? According to the firms themselves, emphatically not. They claim innocence of any intent to aid Hitler's Germany. Witness the telegram sent by the chairman of the board of Standard Oil of New Jersey to Secretary of War Patterson after World War II, when preliminary investigation of Wall Street assistance was underway. During the entire period of our business contracts, we had no inkling of Farben's conniving part in Hitler's brutal politics. We offer any help we can give to see that the complete truth is brought to light and that rigid justice is done. F.W. Abrams, chairman of the board. Unfortunately, the evidence presented is contrary to Abrams' telegraphed assertions. Standard Oil of New Jersey not only aided Hitler's war machine, but had knowledge of this assistance. Emil Helfrich, the board chairman of Standard of New Jersey subsidiary, was a member of the Kepler Circle before Hitler came to power. He continued to give financial contributions to Himmler Circle as late as 1944. Accordingly, it is not at all difficult to visualize why Nazi industrialists were puzzled by investigation and assumed at the end of the war that their Wall Street friends would bail them out and protect them from the wrath of those who had suffered. These attitudes were presented to the Kilgore Committee in 1946. You might also be interested in knowing, Mr. Chairman, that the top IG Farben people and others, when we questioned them about these activities, were inclined at times to be very indignant. Their general attitude and expectation was that the war was over and we ought now to be assisting them in helping to get IG Farben and German industry back on its feet. Some of them have been outwardly said that this questioning and investigation was, in their estimation, only a phenomenon of short duration, because as soon as things got a little settled, they would expect their friends in the United States and in England to be coming over. Their friends, they said, would put a stop to activities such as the investigations and would see that they got the treatment which they regarded as proper and that assistance would be given to them to help reestablish their industry. Chapter 12, Conclusions. We have demonstrated with documentary evidence a number of critical associations between Wall Street international bankers and the rise of Hitler and Nazism in Germany. First, that Wall Street financed the German cartels in the mid-1920s, which in turn proceeded to bring Hitler to power. Second, the financing for Hitler and his SS street thugs came in part from affiliates or subsidiaries of U.S. firms, including Henry Ford in 1922, payments by IG Farben and General Electric in 1933, followed by the Standard Oil of New Jersey and ITT subsidiary payments to Heinrich Himmler up to 1944. Third, the U.S. multinationals under the control of Wall Street profited handsomely from Hitler's military construction program in the 1930s and at least until 1942. Fourth, that these same international bankers used political influence in the U.S. to cover up their wartime collaboration, and to do this, infiltrated the U.S. Control Commission for Germany. Our evidence for these four major assertions can be summarized as follows. In Chapter 1, we presented evidence that Dawes and Young plans for German reparations were formulated by Wall Streeters, temporarily wearing the hats of statesmen, and these loans generated a rain of profits for these international bankers. Owen Young of General Electric, Hjalmar Schacht, A. Vogler, and others intimately connected with Hitler's ascension to power had earlier been the negotiators for the U.S. and German sides, respectively. Three Wall Street houses, Dillon, Reed, Harris Forbes, and National City Company, handled 3/4 of the reparations loans used to create the German cartel system, including the dominant IG Farben and Vereinigte Stahlwerk, which together produced 95% of the explosives for the Nazi side in World War II. The central role of IG Farben in Hitler's coup d'etat was reviewed in Chapter 2. The directors of American IG were identified as prominent American businessmen: Walter Teagle, a close Roosevelt associate and backer and NRA administrator; banker Paul Warburg, his brother Max Warburg, was on the board of IG Farben in Germany; and Edsel Ford. Farben contributed 40,000 Reichsmarks directly to Schacht and Hess for use in the crucial 1933 elections, and Farben was subsequently in the forefront of military development in Nazi Germany. A donation of 60,000 Reichsmarks was made to Hitler by German General Electric AEG, which had 4 directors and a 25 to 30% interest held by the U.S. General Electric parent company. This role was described in Chapter 3, and we found that Gerard Swoop, an originator of Roosevelt's New Deal, its National Recovery Administration segment, together with Owen Young of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and Clark Miner of International General Electric, were the dominant Wall Streeters in AEG and the most significant single influence. We also found no evidence to indict the German electric firm Siemens, which was not under Wall Street control. In contrast, there is documentary evidence of both AEG and Osram, the other units of the German electrical industry, both of which had U.S. participation and control, did finance Hitler. In fact, almost all directors of German General Electric were Hitler backers, either directly through AEG or indirectly through other German firms. GE rounded out its Hitler support by technical cooperation with Krupp, aimed at restricting U.S. development of tungsten carbide, which worked to the detriment of the United States in World War II. We concluded that AEG plants in Germany managed by a yet unknown maneuver to avoid bombing by the Allies. An examination of the role of Standard Oil of New Jersey, which was and is controlled by the Rockefeller interests, was undertaken in Chapter 4. Standard Oil apparently did not finance Hitler's ascension to power in 1933. That part of the myth of the Sidney Warburg is not proven. On the other hand, payments were made up to 1944 by Standard Oil of New Jersey to develop synthetic gasoline for war purposes on behalf of the Nazis, and through its wholly owned subsidiary to Heinrich Himmler's SS Circle of Friends for political purposes. Standard Oil's role was technical aid to Nazi development of synthetic rubber and gasoline through a U.S. research company under the management control of Standard Oil. the Ethel Gasoline Company, jointly owned by Standard Oil of New Jersey and General Motors, was instrumental in supplying vital ethyl lead to Germany, Nazi Germany, over the written protests of the U.S. War Department, with clear knowledge that ethyl lead was for Nazi military purposes. In Chapter 5, we demonstrated that International Telephone and Telegraph Company, one of the more notorious multinationals, worked both sides of World War II through Baron Kurt von Schroeder of the Schroeder Banking Group. ITT also had a 28% interest in Focke-Wulf Aircraft, which manufactured excellent German fighter planes. We also found that Texaco, Texas Oil Company, was involved in Nazi endeavors through German attorney Westrick, but dropped its chairman of the board, Reiber, when these endeavors were publicized. Henry Ford was an early 1922 Hitler backer, and Edsel Ford continued the family tradition in 1942 by encouraging French Ford to profit from arming the German Wehrmacht. Subsequently, these Ford-produced vehicles were used against American soldiers as they landed in France in 1944. For his early recognition of and timely assistance to the Nazis, Henry Ford received a Nazi medal in 1938. The records of French Ford suggest Ford Motor received kid glove treatment from the Nazis after 1940. The provable threads of Hitler financing are drawn together in Chapter 7 and answer with precise names and figures the questions who financed Hitler. This chapter indicts Wall Street and incidentally no one else of consequence in the United States except the Ford family. The Ford family is not normally associated with the Wall Street, but is certainly a part of the power elite. In earlier chapters, we cited several Roosevelt associates, including Teagle of Standard Oil, the Warburg family, and Gerard Swoop. In Chapter 8, the role of Putzi Hofnagel, another Roosevelt friend and participant in the Reichstag fire, is traced. The composition of the Nazi inner circle during World War II and the financial contributions of Standard Oil of New Jersey and ITT subsidiaries are traced in Chapter 9. Documentary proof of these monetary contributions is presented. Kurt von Schroeder is identified as a key intermediary in this SS slush fund. Finally, in Chapter 10, we received a review of books suppressed in 1934 on the myth of Sidney Warburg. The suppressed book accused the Rockefellers, the Warburgs, and the major oil companies of financing Hitler. While the name Sidney Warburg was no doubt an invention, the extraordinary fact remains that the argument in the suppressed Sidney Warburg book is remarkably close to the evidence presented now. It also remains a puzzle why James Paul Warburg, 15 years later, would want to attempt, in a rather transparently slipshod manner, to refute the context of the Warburg book, a book he claims not to have seen. It is perhaps even more of a puzzle why Warburg would choose Nazi von Paupin's memoirs as the vehicle to present his refutation. Finally, in Chapter 11, we examine the roles of the Morgan and Chase banks in World War II, specifically their collaboration with the Nazis in France while a major war was raging. In other words, as in our two previous examinations of the links between New York and international bankers and major historical events, we find a provable pattern of subsidy and political manipulation. The pervasive influence of international bankers. Looking at the broad array of facts presented in the 3 volumes of the Wall Street series, we find persistent recurrence of the same names: Owen Young, Gerard Swoop, Hallmark Schacht, Bernard Baruch, etc. Same international bankers: J.P. Morgan, Guaranteed Trust, Chase, and the same location in New York, usually 120 Broadway. This group of international bankers backed the Bolshevik Revolution and subsequently profited from the establishment of the Soviet Russia. This group backed Roosevelt and profited from the New Deal socialism. This group also backed Hitler and certainly profited from German armament in the 1930s. When big business should have been running its business operations at Ford Motor, Standard of New Jersey, and so on, we find it actively and deeply involved in political upheavals, war, and revolutions in 3 major countries. The version of history presented here is that the financial elite knowingly and with premeditation assisted the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917 in concert with German bankers. After profiting handsomely from the German hyperinflationary distress of 1923 and planning to place the German reparations burdens onto the back of American investors, Wall Street found it had brought about the 1929 financial crisis. 2 men were then backed as leaders for major Western countries: Franklin D. Roosevelt in the United States, Adolf Hitler in Germany. The Roosevelt New Deal and Hitler's 4-year plan had great similarities. The Roosevelt and Hitler plans were plans for fascist takeovers of the representative countries. While Roosevelt's NRA failed due to then operating constitutional constraints, Hitler's plan succeeded. Why did the Wall Street elite, the international bankers, want Roosevelt and Hitler in power? This is an aspect we have not explored. According to the myth of Sidney Warburg, Wall Street wanted a policy of revenge. That is, it wanted a war in Europe between France and Germany. We know, even from establishment history, that both Hitler and Roosevelt acted out policies leading to war. The link-ups between persons and events in these three-book series would require another book, but a single example will perhaps indicate the remarkable concentration of power within relatively few organizations and the use of this power. On May 1st, 1918, when the Bolsheviks controlled only a small fraction of Russia and were to come near to losing even that fraction in the summer of 1918, the American League to Aid and Cooperate with Russia was organized in Washington, D.C. to support the Bolsheviks. This was not a hands-off Russia type of committee formed by the Communist Party USA or its allies. It was a committee created by Wall Street with George P. Wallen, a vacuum oil company, as treasurer, and Coffin and Ouden of General Electric, along with Thompson, the Federal Reserve System, Willard of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and assorted socialists. When we look at the rise of Hitler and Nazism, we find Vacuum Oil and General Electric well represented. Ambassador Dodd in Germany was struck by the monetary and technical contribution by the Rockefeller-controlled Vacuum Oil Company in building up military gasoline facilities for the Nazis. The ambassador tried to warn Roosevelt. Dodd believed in his apparent naivete of world affairs that Roosevelt would intervene, but Roosevelt himself was backed by the same oil interests, and Walter Teagle of Standard Oil, New Jersey, and the NRA was on the board of Roosevelt's Warm Springs Foundation. So in but one of the many examples, we find the Rockefeller-controlled Vacuum Oil Company prominently assisting in the creation of Bolshevik Russia, the military buildup of Nazi Germany, and backing Roosevelt's New Deal. Is the United States ruled by a dictatorial elite? Within the last decade or so, certainly since the 1960s, a steady flow of literature has presented a thesis that the United States is ruled by a self-perpetuating and unelected power elite. Even further, most of these books aver that this elite controls, or at the least heavily influences, all foreign and domestic policy decisions, and that no idea becomes respectable or is published in the United States without the tacit approval or perhaps lack of disapproval of this elitist circle. Obviously, the very flow of anti-establishment literature by itself testifies that the United States cannot be wholly under the thumb of any single group or elite. On the other hand, anti-establishment literature is not fully recognized or reasonably discussed in academic or media circles. More often than not, it consists of a limited edition, privately produced, almost hand-to-hand circulated. There are some exceptions, true, but not enough to dispute the observation that anti-establishment critics do not easily enter normal informational distribution channels. Whereas, in the early and mid-1960s, any concept of rule by a conspiratorial elite, or indeed an elite of any kind, was reason enough to dismiss the proponent out of hand as a nutcase. The atmosphere for such concepts has changed radically. The Watergate affair probably added the final touches to a long-developing environment of skepticism and doubt. We are almost at the point where anyone who accepts, for example, the Warren Commission report or believes that the decline and fall of Mr. Nixon did not have some conspiratorial aspects is suspect. In brief, no one any longer believes the establishment information process, and there is a wide variety of alternative presentations of events now available for the curious. Several hundred books from the full range of political and philosophical spectrum add bits and pieces of evidence, more hypotheses and more accusations. What was not too long ago a kooky idea talked about at midnight behind closed doors and hushed in almost conspiratorial whispers is now openly debated, not to be sure in establishment newspapers, but certainly on non-network radio talk shows, the underground press, and even from time to time in books from respectable establishment publishing houses. So let us ask the question again, is there an elected power elite behind the U.S. government? A substantive and often cited source of information is Carol Quigley, professor of international relations at Georgetown University, who in 1966 had published a monumental modern history entitled Tragedy and Hope. Quigley's book is apart from others in this revisionist vein by virtue of the fact that it was based on a 2-year study of the internal documents of one of the power centers. Quigley traces the history of the power elite. The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. Quigley also demonstrates that the Council on Foreign Relations, the National Planning Association, and other groups are semi-secret policy-making bodies under the control of this power elite. In the following tabular presentation, we have listed 5 such revisionist books, including Quigley's. Their essential theses and compatibility with the 3 volumes of the Wall Street series are summarized. It is surprising that in the 3 major historical events noted, Carroll Quigley is not at all consistent with the Wall Street series evidence. Quigley goes a long way to provide evidence for the existence of the power elite, but does not penetrate the operations of the elite. Possibly the papers used by Quigley had been vetted and did not include documentation on elitist manipulation of such events as the Bolshevik Revolution, Hitler's ascension to power, and the election of Roosevelt in 1933. More likely, these political manipulations may not be recorded at all in files of the power groups. They may have been unrecorded actions by a small ad hoc segment of the elite. It is noteworthy that the documents used by this author came from government sources, recording the day-to-day actions of Trotsky, Lenin, Roosevelt, Hitler, J.P. Morgan, and the various firms and banks involved. On the other hand, such authors as Jules Archer, Gary Allen, Helen P. Lassell, and William Domhoff, writing from widely different political standpoints, are consistent with the Wall Street evidence. These writers present a hypothesis of a power elite manipulating the U.S. government. The Wall Street series demonstrates how this hypothesized power elite has manipulated specific historical events. Obviously, any such exercise of unconstrained and superlegal power is unconstitutional, even though wrapped in the fabric of law-abiding actions. We can therefore legitimately raise the question of the existence of a subversive force operating to remove constitutionally guaranteed rights. The New York elite as a subversive force. 20th century history as recorded in establishment textbooks and journals is inaccurate. It is a history which is based solely upon the official documents which various administrations have seen fit to release for public consumption. But an accurate history cannot be based on selective release of documentary archives. Accuracy requires access to all documents in practice as previously classified documents in the U.S. State Department files, the British Foreign Office, and the German Foreign Ministry archives, and other depositories are required. A new version of history has emerged. The prevailing establishment vision is seen to be not only inaccurate, but designed to hide a pervasive fabric of deceit and immoral conduct. The center of political power, as authorized by the U.S. Constitution, is with an elected Congress and an elected president, working within the framework and under the constraints of a constitution as interpreted by unbiased Supreme Court. We have in the past assumed that political power is consequently carefully exercised by the executive and legislative branch after due deliberation and assessment of the wishes of the electorate. In fact, nothing could be further from this assumption. The electorate has long suspected, but now knows, that political promises are worth nothing. Lies are the order of the day for policy implementers. Wars are started and stopped with no shred of coherent explanation. Political words have never matched political deeds. Why not? Apparently because the center of political power has been elsewhere than with elected and presumably responsive representatives in Washington. And this power elite has its own objectives, which are inconsistent with those of the public at large. In this 3-volume series, we have identified for 3 historical events the seat of political power in the United States, the power behind the scenes. The hidden influence of Washington is that of the financial establishment in New York. The private international bankers, more specifically the financial houses of J.P. Morgan, the Rockefeller-controlled Chase Manhattan Bank, and in earlier days, before amalgamation of the other Manhattan Bank with the former Chase Bank, the Warburgs. The United States has, in spite of the Constitution and its supposed constraints, become a quasi-totalitarian state. While we do not yet have the overt trappings of dictatorship, the concentration camps knock on the door at midnight, we most certainly do have threats and actions aimed at the survival of non-establishment critics, use of the Internal Revenue Service to bring dissidents in line, and manipulation of the Constitution by a court system that is politically subservient to the establishment. It is in the pecuniary interests of the international bankers to centralize political power, and this centralization cannot be achieved without a collectivist society such as a socialist Russia, National Socialist Germany, or Fabian Socialist United States. There can be no full understanding and appreciation of 20th century American politics and foreign policy without the realization that this financial elite effectively monopolizes Washington policy. In case after case, newly released documents implicates this elite and confirms this hypothesis. The revisionist versions of the entry of the United States into World War I and II, Korea, and Vietnam reveal the influence and objectives of this elite. For most of the 20th century, the Federal Reserve System, particularly the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, which is outside the control of Congress, unaudited and uncontrolled with the power to print money and create credit at will, has exercised a virtual monopoly over the direction of the American economy. In foreign affairs, the Council on Foreign Relations, superficially an innocent forum for academics, businessmen, and politicians, contains within its shell, perhaps unknown to many members, a power center that unilaterally determines U.S. foreign policy. The major objective of this submerged and previously subversive foreign policy is the acquisition of markets and economic power, profits, if you will, for a small group of giant multinationals under the virtual control of a few banking investment houses and controlling families. These foundations, controlled by this elite, researched by complaint and spineless academic conservatives as well as liberals, have been directed into channels useful for the objectives of the elite, essentially to maintain the subversive and unconstitutional power apparatus. Through publishing houses controlled by the same financial elite, unwelcome books have been squashed and useful books promoted. Fortunately, publishing has a few barriers to entry and is almost atomistically competitive. Through control of a dozen or so major newspapers run by editors who think alike, public information can almost be orchestrated at will. Yesterday, the space program, today, an energy crisis or a campaign for ecology, tomorrow, a war in the Middle East, or some other manufactured crisis. The total result of this manipulation of society by the establishment elite has been 4 major wars in 60 years, a crippling national debt, abandonment of the Constitution, suppression of freedom and opportunity, and creation of a vast credibility gulf between the man on the street and Washington, D.C. While the transparent device of 2 major parties trumpeting artificial differences, circus-like conventions, and the cliche of bipartisan foreign policy no longer carries credibility, and the financial elite itself recognizes that its policies lack public acceptance, it is obviously prepared to go it alone without even nominal public support. In brief, we now have to consider and debate whether the New York-based elitist establishment is a subversive force operating with deliberation and knowledge to suppress the Constitution and a free society. That will be the task ahead in the next decade. The slowly emerging revisionist truth. The arena for this debate and the basis for our changes of subversion and the evidence is the evidence provided by the revisionist historian. Slowly over decades, book by book, almost line by line, the truth of recent history has emerged as documents are released, probed, analyzed, and set within a more valid historical framework. Let us consider a few examples. American entry into World War II was supposedly precipitated, according to the establishment version, by the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Revisionists have established that Franklin D. Roosevelt and General Marshall knew of the impending Japanese attack and did nothing to warn the Pearl Harbor military authorities. The establishment wanted war with Japan. Subsequently, the establishment made certain that congressional investigation of Pearl Harbor would fit the Roosevelt whitewash. In the words of Percy Greaves, chief research expert for the Republican minority on the Joint Congressional Committee investigating Pearl Harbor, the complete facts will never be known. Most of the so-called investigations have been attempts to suppress, mislead, or confuse those who seek the truth. From the beginning to the end, facts and files have been withheld so as to reveal only those items of information which benefit the administration under investigation. Those seeking the truth are told that other facts or documents cannot be revealed because they are intermingled in personal diaries, pertain to our relations with foreign countries, or are sworn to contain no information of value. But that was not the first attempt to bring the United States into war, or the last. The Morgan interest, in concert with Winston Churchill, tried to bring the U.S. into World War I as early as 1915, and succeeded in doing so in 1917. Colin Thompson's Lusitania implicates Woodrow Wilson in the sinking of the Lusitania, a horror device to generate a public backlash to draw the United States into a war with Germany. Thompson demonstrates that Woodrow Wilson knew 4 darts beforehand that the Lusitania was carrying 6 million rounds of ammunition plus explosives, and therefore passengers who proposed to sail on that vessel were sailing in violation of the statute of this country. The British Board of Inquiry under Lord Mersey was instructed by the British government that it considered politically expedient that Captain Turner, the master of the Lusitania, be prominently blamed for the disaster. In retrospect, given Colin Thompson's evidence, the blame is more fairly to be attributed to President Wilson, Colonel House, J.P. Morgan, and Winston Churchill. This conspiratorial elite should have been brought to trial for wolf negligence, if not treason. It is to Lord Mersey's eternal credit that after performing his duty under instructions from His Majesty's government and placing the blame on Captain Turner, he resigned, rejected his fee, and from that date on refused to handle British government commissions. To his friends, Lord Mersey would always say about the Lusitania case that it was a dirty business. Then in 1933-34 came the attempt by the Morgan firm to install a fascist dictatorship in the United States. In the words of Jules Archer, it was planned to be a fascist putsch to take over the government and run it under a direct dictator on behalf of America's bankers and industrialists. Again, a single courageous individual, General Smedley Darlington Butler, who blew the whistle on the Wall Street conspiracy. And once again, Congress stands out, particularly Congressman Dickstein and McCormack, but by its gutless refusal to do no more than conduct a token whitewash investigation. Since World War II, we have seen the Korean War and the Vietnamese War, meaningless, meandering, no-win wars, costly in dollars and lives, with no other political purpose but to generate multi-billion-dollar armaments contracts. Certainly, these wars were not fought to restrain communism because for 50 years the establishment had been nurturing and subsidizing the Soviet Union, which supplied armaments to the other side in both wars, Korea and Vietnam. So our revisionist history will show that the United States directly or indirectly armed both sides in at least Korea and Vietnam. In the assassination of President Kennedy, to take a domestic example, it is difficult to find anyone who today accepts the findings of the Warren Commission, except perhaps the members of that commission. Yet key evidence is still hidden from the public eye for 50 to 75 years. The Watergate affair demonstrates even to the man in the street the White House can be a vicious nest of intrigue and deception. Of all the recent history of the story of Operation Keelhaul was perhaps the most disgusting. Operation Keelhaul was the forced reparation of millions of Russians at the orders of President then General Dwight D. Eisenhower, in direct violation of the Geneva Convention of 1929 and the long-standing American tradition of political refuge. Operation Keelhaul, which contravenes all our ideas of elementary decency and individual freedom, were undertaken at the direct orders of General Eisenhower, and we may now presume was a part of a long-range program of nurturing collectivism, whether it be Soviet communism, Hitler's Nazism, or FDR's New Deal. Yet until recent publication of documentary evidence by Julius Epstein, anyone who dared to suggest Eisenhower would betray millions of innocent individuals for political purposes was viciously and mercilessly attacked. What this revisionist history really teaches us is that our willingness as individual citizens to surrender political power to an elite has cost the world approximately 200 million persons killed from 1820 to 1975. Into that untold misery, the concentration camps, the political prisoners, the suppression and oppression of those who tried to bring the truth to light. When will it stop? It will not stop until we act upon one simple axiom: that the power system continues only so long as individuals want it to continue, and it will continue only so long as individuals try to get something for nothing. The day when a majority of individuals declares or acts as if it wants nothing from the government, declares that it will look after its own welfare and interests, that on that day our power elites are doomed. The attraction to go along with power elites is the attraction of something for nothing. That is the bait. The establishment always offers something for nothing, but something is taken from someone else as taxes or plunder and awarded elsewhere in exchange for political support. Periodic crises and wars are used to whip up support for other plunder reward cycles, which in effect tighten the noose around our individual liberties. And of course, we have hordes of academic sponges, immoral businessmen, and just plain hangers-on to act as a non-productive recipients for their plunder. Stop the circle of plunder and immoral war and elitist structures collapse. But not until a majority finds the moral courage and the internal fortitude to reject the something-for-nothing con game and replace it by voluntary associations, voluntary communes, or local rule and decentralized societies will the killing and plunder cease. Okay, Appendix A. Program of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Note, this program is important because it demonstrates that the nature of Nazism was known publicly as early as 1920. The program of the German Workers' Party is limited as to period. The leaders have no intention, once the aims announced in it have been achieved, for setting up fresh ones, merely in order to increase the discontent of the masses artificially and so ensure the continued existence of the party. 1. We demanded the union of all Germans to form a greater Germany on the basis of the right of self-determination enjoyed by nations. 2. We demand equality of rights for the German people and its dealings with other nations and abolition of the peace treaty of Versailles and Saint-Germain. 3. We demand land and territory colonies for the nourishment of our people and for settling our superfluous population. 4. None but the members of the nation may be citizens of the state. None but those of German blood, whatever their creed, may be members of the nation. No Jew, therefore, may be a member of the nation. Anyone who is not a citizen of the state may live in Germany only as a guest and must be regarded as being subject to foreign laws. 6. The right of voting on the state's government and legislation is to be enjoyed by the citizens of the state alone. We demand, therefore, that all official appointments of whatever kind, whether in the Reich, in the country, or in the smaller locality, shall be granted to citizens of the state alone. We oppose the corrupting influence of Parliament, of filling posts merely with a view to party considerations, and without reference to character or capability. 7. We demand that the state shall make it the first duty to promote the industry and livelihood of citizens of the state. If it is not possible to nourish the entire population of the state, a foreign national, non-citizen of the state must be excluded from the Reich. 8. All non-German immigration must be prevented. We demand that all non-Germans who enter Germany subsequently to August 2nd, 1941, shall be required forthwith to depart from the Reich. 9. All citizens of the state shall be equal as regards rights and duties. 10. It must be the first duty of each citizen of the state to work with his mind or with his body. The activities of the individual may not clash with the interests of the whole, but must proceed within the frame of the community and be for the general good. We demand, therefore, 11, abolition of incomes unearned by work. Abolition of the thraldom of interest. 12, in the view of the enormous sacrifice of life and property demanded of every nation by every war, personal enrichment due to war must be regarded as a crime against the nation. We demand, therefore, ruthless confiscation of all war gains. 13, we demand the nationalization of all businesses which have been set up to the present formed into companies, trusts. 14, we demand the profits from the wholesale trade shall be shared out. 15, we demand extensive development of provisions for old age. 16, we demand creation and maintenance of a healthy middle class, immediate communalization of wholesale business premises and their lease at a cheap rate to small traders, and that extreme consideration shall be shown to all small purveyors to the state, district authorities, and smaller localities. 17, we demand land reform suitable to our national requirements, passing of a law for confiscation without compensation of land for communal purposes, abolition of interest on land loans, and prevention of all speculation in land. 18, we demand ruthless prosecution of those whose activities are injurious to the common interest. Sordid crimes against the nation, usurers, profiteers, etc. must be punished with death, whatever their creed or race. 19, we demand that the Roman law, which serves the materialist world order, shall be replaced by a legal system for all Germany. 20, with the aim of opening to every capable and industrious German the possibility of higher education and of thus obtaining achievement, the state must consider a thoroughly reconstruction of our national system of education. The curriculum of all educational establishments must be brought into line with the requirements of practical life. Comprehension of the state, sociology must be the school objective, beginning with the first drawn of intelligence in the people. We demand development of the gifted children of poor parents, whatever their class occupation, at the expense of the state. 21. The state must see to raising the standard of health in the nation by protecting mothers and infants, prohibiting child labor, and increasing bodily efficiency by obligatory gymnastics and sports laid down by law, and by extensive support of clubs engaging in the bodily development of the young. We demand abolition of a paid army and a formation of a national army. 23. We demand legal warfare against conscious political lying and its dissemination on the press. In order to facilitate a creation of a German national press, we demand A, that all editors of newspapers and their assistants employing the German language must be a member of the nation. B, that special permission from the state shall be necessary before non-German newspapers may appear. These are not necessarily printed in the German language. C, that non-German shall be prohibited by law from participating financially in or influencing German newspapers, and that the penalty for a contravention of law shall be suppression of any such newspaper and immediate deportation of the non-German concerned in it. It must be forbidden to publish papers which do not conduce to the national welfare. We demand legal prosecution of all tendencies in art and literature of any kind likely to degenerate our life as a nation. The suppression of institutions which militate against the requirements above mentioned. 24, we demand liberty for all religious denominations in the state, so far as they are not a danger to it and do not militate against the moral feelings of the German race. The party as such stands for positive Christianity, but does not bind itself in the manner of creed to any particular confession. It combats the Jewish material spirit within us and without us, and is convinced that our nation can only achieve permanent health from within on the principle. The common interest before self. That all foregoing may be realized, we demand the creation of a strong central power of the state, unquestioned authority of the politically centralized parliament over the entire Reich and its organization, and formation of chambers for classes and occupations for the purpose of carrying out the general laws promulgated by the Reich and the various states of the Confederation. The leaders of the party swear to go straight forward, if necessary, to sacrifice their lives in securing fulfillment of the foregoing points. Munich, February 24th, 1920. All right. So we have a few more appendices to read. We'll cover those next week. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. This is Todd Lewis of the Praise of Fly podcast, signing off.